Hello. On behalf of the College of Continuing and Professional Studies and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota, welcome to our 2024 OLLI Sampler event. My name is Kate Schaefers, and I'm the Director of OLLI at the University of Minnesota, and I'll be your host today. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement statement for the University of Minnesota. We acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It's important to acknowledge the peoples on whose lands we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. So before we start, I'd like to share a little bit about OLLI. OLLI is the place to learn, grow, and connect for lifelong learners ages 50 and above. With hundreds of enrichment courses a year, plus special interest groups and book clubs, OLLI helps you explore your interests and open your mind to new ideas, cultures, and learning. You'll hear a little bit more about that from Nancy Allen when I introduce her. If you're a current OLLI member, thank you for your continued support and participation. And if you're new to OLLI, welcome. We look forward to getting to know you. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Advisory Board Chair Nancy Allen. In addition to her role as chair of the advisory board, Nancy's been an active OLLI member since 2014. She frequently volunteers as a course assistant, an OLLI ambassador, and other roles as assigned. So please join me in welcoming Nancy Allen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I tell you, this is one of the most popular events we have, and I give credit to the marketing department and to Kate, and to thank you, all of you who are participating in this. So as Kate said, I've been a member of OLLI since 2014, and I've kind of had almost every role, but the one that I enjoy the most is being the student. So OLLI is through the University of Minnesota, and it is a place where we learn, we grow, and we connect with OLLIs. Thank you. OLLI is a membership organization with lots of opportunities to get involved. And we have over 900 members. We have over 150 course leaders. And of course, we have a volunteer advisory board. And we offer hundreds of non-credit courses per year. And the fun thing about OLLI's classes is that you can sit back, you can learn, you can read, you can relax, and guess what? No papers, no exams. It's all for your own enjoyment. So what kind of courses does OLLI offer? In our particular Minnesota one, we have cultural awareness classes, we have government classes, geography, world affairs, and I have enjoyed being the course assistant in a myriad of different classes, from history to literature to world affairs. So we cover quite an extensive girth of different subjects. So there's always a subject for you. So they're all practical courses, and they're courses where you can just take out as much as you want and learn as much as you want, and they are interactive. So this particular fall, we have over 90 classes. I just got the number from Kate. We have over 90 classes. 30%, I believe, are on Zoom, and the rest are going to be in person. I hope I got that right. Kate will correct me if I'm wrong. And I have signed up for something like 10 classes, and I am going to take the class on kitchen chemistry, which is wonderful, and also the Beatles. I try to mix things up, and it's always fun to take a class that may be a little bit out of your comfort zone, because you'd be surprised how much you do learn. So as you can see from this list, we have a myriad of classes of different disciplines. So we are on the campus. I'm going to say the St. Paul campus now, but maybe that's going to change a little bit. But we have we have locations all over the community, in both Minneapolis and down in Wayzata and in St. Paul. So we try to have quite a large area so that you can go to classes closer to home. And we obviously are a very active and engaged community. So our motto is, come for the classes, but stay for the community. And we have many, many, many special interest groups as well. As you can see, we have everything from birding to nonfiction classes to book clubs. We have bikers and sports huddles, so movie appreciation. So those are what we call the SIG classes, and they're special interest groups. And they're informal and they meet anywhere. So OLLI has an opportunity for many, in many capacities. You're welcome to lead a course if you have an interest in something. You can become a course assistant. You can manage a SIG class, serve on the advisory board, or host an event, or volunteer for a standing committee. Most of our members, they love the classes, they come for the community, but they also love to volunteer. So we welcome that very much. We love our volunteers. So we have many classes on Zoom. I know after the pandemic, this became a very popular way for us to teach and to learn. And we have lots of classes on Zoom, and never feel that you are alone. If you need some assistance on learning how to take a class on Zoom, we're here to help. Again, we have trainings for all the courses, different ways of wanting to join up for class, particularly in Zoom. So we do offer that. We have a membership annual fee, and that fee covers for the year. We have over 250 courses per year, and we have special interest group, book club. So there's an awful lot you get for your membership in OLLI. So, and scholarships are available, and we welcome you. And so that's it. And I hope to see you in classes. I try to attend as many as I can in person. If not, I hope to see you on a Zoom class. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about one of my very favorite organizations that I'm very involved in and have been, and that is OLLI. So thank you, and have a great morning.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And also, I'll just put in a little plug. We do have a membership special going on for the fall, so you can find out more about that off of our website. And so now I'd like to introduce Laura Peterson. Laura joined us during the pandemic in 2020, and she has been an active learner and volunteer ever since. And she's going to tell you a little bit about her experience with OLLI. Laura?
Hi, I am for some reason unable to start my video. I keep getting a message saying the host has stopped my video. So I'm sorry for whatever I've done, but I'll talk anyway.
We'll get that fixed, Laura. Just go ahead and start.
Thank you. I'll only take a few minutes of your time because I know I'm standing between you and the classes. I suspect that you're here today because you're like me and you enjoy learning. So my love of learning just goes way back. Way back, I majored in Chinese history in college, but then I went to nursing school and then I went to law school, and I could have just kept going, but eventually the money ran out. So I grit my teeth and I went ahead and spent my life as a lawyer. The demands of a career and family clearly took precedence, but then I retired, and I retired just 2 weeks before the pandemic began. So I really wasn't prepared for all the lockdowns. But a friend of mine, Lonnie Skretner, who's a retired history teacher, and she regularly teaches for OLLI, she told me about OLLI, and I was fascinated. So I checked it out, and it has become such an important part of my life. I have to say that first semester, if you will, at OLLI, I took 13 classes. And so it was a bit much, but I loved it. And I just sat back in my hammock with my laptop and I learned. I loved every class that I took. I took classes on the politics of poverty, the Supreme Court, police killings, Jane Eyre, clearly the gamut. And I really couldn't get enough, even though there was 13 classes. OLLI provided structure and joy for me during the pandemic and really ignited my thirst for more and ignited my desire to get involved. So since that time, I have taken classes on art at our Art Institute, MIA, weapons of mass destruction, insects with real insects brought to the class, Chinese history, of course, immunology, the food stamp program, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Africa, India, TED Talks, Charles Dickens, and more. And although classes were offered through Zoom exclusively, as Nancy mentioned, now you can do both. You can either stay home in your jammies for Zoom classes, or you can go to the in-person classes, which are offered throughout the Twin Cities at different locations. And I have met wonderful, wonderful people in those classes. That also stimulated my desire to get more involved with the program. As Nancy mentioned, there's lots of ways to get involved. You don't have to, but this is a volunteer-run organization, and we need the contributors, and we have hundreds of people who are involved and love to contribute. There is no homework, no tests, as Nancy mentioned. It's easy and enjoyable. My life truly would not be as interesting without OLLI, and I can't wait to get the catalog of classes for each quarter. There's hundreds of classes, and you will not find a better deal anywhere. $325 for unlimited classes for 12 months. It's an amazing deal. So please check out our fall 2024 catalog, consider joining, and enjoy the rest of today's presentations. And Nancy, just to note, I've requested 15 classes this time around, and even that was a struggle. I think I had 30 on my list, and I had to pare it down. So I hope to see many of you in classes this fall, and please enjoy the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I will also clarify too, some of our classes are 7 weeks long. And so those are, a bigger commitment and a deeper dive, but we also have some single session courses. So Laura, I hope some of them were shorter than all 7 sessions, but if you want to be an OLLI super achiever, you're welcome to be.
Thank you.
So I'd now like to introduce you to our 3 course leaders who will offer brief lectures based on the courses they have taught for us or will be teaching for us. 2 of them are teaching this fall in addition to this lecture, and I'll introduce them first, and then we'll dive into those lectures. So our first lecture is an example of a course that offers practical insights for career and life planning in the second half of life. George Dow will guide us through the concept of a portfolio life. Now, George spent his career coaching executives as they transition into new lives and careers. And his insights are drawn from the experiences of thousands of people as they've navigated new opportunities and challenges in the workplace and beyond. Now, some of our OLLI courses explore arts and culture, and we'll have a lecture on that today. Our second presentation is The People's Art, Folkways in the Russian Empire, and it's going to focus on the beauty of folk art in everyday life, as well as the creativity of the unknown artists who created it. And our presenter, Carol Veldman Rudie, is an education outreach coordinator at the Museum of Russian Art, where she conducts research and presents on topics about Russian art and culture. She has an MA from the University of Minnesota, as well as graduate work in art history. Now, some of our courses feature early career scholars through the OLLI Scholars Program. Now, this is a program where we bring in graduate students as well as postdoc fellows to share their fascinating cutting-edge work in the with the OLLI community. And our scholars are partially donated by donations from our members. In today's sampler, we're going to hear from OLLI scholar Ethan Besser Fredrick. Ethan is finishing up a PhD in history, where he specializes in religious and social history of Mexico and Spain. And his research focuses on understanding the relationships between violence, politics, and religion in social movements during the 20th century. And his talk today will be Malintzin, the woman who conquered Mexico. And we're going to start with George. So George, let's go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And hello, everybody. I've heard there are quite a few people on this Zoom meeting. It might be up to 1,200 or something like that. It's just amazing. So I'm going to just jump right in here and get started meeting all of you wonderful people through Zoom. And so, as Kate said, my presentation's on this topic of is a portfolio life in your future. And I'm going to share with you what is a portfolio and some steps on getting in that direction, if that's of interest to you. So I'll start with the big picture. These are our life stages, a model I created to share with you what I think happens in our lifespan. First of all, in the first 25 years of our life, it's about broad mastery, mostly learning, academics, social skills, how to get along in the world, how to navigate this world. Then we move into achievement, mostly professional achievement, perhaps family achievement, growing a family, if that's in your situation. Broader possibilities is really a code word for portfolio life. Somewhere between 50 and 75, we move towards a broader definition of our life. And I'm going to use most of my time to talk about that part. But after 75, give or take, it's about health and legacy. Health is the gatekeeper that determines how much longer we have broader possibilities. And legacy is the scorecard, how we did in our life. Now, this looks like a clock, but it's really more accurately described as an hourglass. So you look at the top part of our lives, the sand is on the top and the world is our oyster. We have broad possibilities. Eventually, we have to pick a major. We have to pick a focus on our professional life, and perhaps we start a family. We get more narrow in that period between 25 and 50, and then somewhere between 50 and 75. Often it's in the mid to late 50s, mid 60s. It's this broader possibility period that I'm going to talk about. And then, of course, somewhere after 70, health and legacy. As I said, health is the gatekeeper, legacy is the scorecard. Now, I've taught this portfolio life class maybe 6 times for OLLI. And I think in the spring, I'm planning on, since I'm turning 70 in December, I think I'm going to do something like is a portfolio, revisiting the portfolio life after age 70. I'm going to do the first session. They're all 90 minutes on the portfolio life, with the exception of health. And then my wife, Bonnie, who's a retired family practice physician, will talk about the health issues after 70, especially. And then the last session, I'll talk about legacy. What's our legacy vision? Personal, professional, and community. So that's looking forward. But let's just kind of dig into what this definition of a portfolio life is. And I want to direct you to my website, georgedow.com is how you find it on Google. Just and look in the upper middle, you see Retirement Reimagined. That's a drop-down menu, and the second drop-down is Retirement Reimagined Guide. And in that guide, you're going to have 10 articles that are all about portfolio life. And the first one is Life and Work After 60, Broader Possibilities Ahead. And you can read through that and go take a deeper dive into what is a portfolio life. And then there'll be case studies for each of the 5 portfolio life elements I'm about to describe. The origin story is a man named David Corbett, who wrote the book Portfolio Life, A New Path to Work, Purpose, and Passion After 50. Now, for 35 years, I've done career coaching, mostly for business and nonprofit leaders. And I needed to develop a program for them if they were in their mid to late 50s or early 60s, or maybe mid 60s. Some have been 70. And they say, I want to move towards retirement, but I want a different version of retirement. And this model that came from David Corbett was created in a Boston program called New Directions. And my model mimics it quite a bit. But I've kind of put my own spin on it based on 35 years of working with people, either transitioning to another job or transitioning to retirement. And I'm still working in that field right now. So what does it look like? Let's go through step by step. The first is working in the form you want. And again, each of these 5 portfolio life elements, I've got an article with a case study. This case study is about my father and my father-in-law. And my father retired at 65 as a sales rep, and from 65 to 80, he was a part-time sales rep for a bank phone company. My father-in-law, he was about to lose his job, and he said, I'd like to keep working. Instead of a vice president of research and development, let me be an engineer again. And from age 57 to 67, he was a half-time engineer again, and he loved it. He said it was the best job of his life. He kind of reinvented his work to go half-time. Now, the first 5 years he was working full-time, and they said, we got a great deal from Jack. We pay him half-time, but he thinks about us all the time. But then the second 5 years, from age 62 to 67, he did work half-time, and it was his bridge to retirement. So those are case studies from my father and my father-in-law. They've really helped me in guiding my future. Learning and self-development, a woman from my church I got to know that talked about OLLI and the University of Minnesota. So that's a lot about learning and development through programs like OLLI and the U of M program, where I guess 62 and older, you get free, non-credited, or maybe you can pay a whopping $10 a credit. And I've known people who have gotten their PhD after age 60 through this program at the University of Minnesota. So OLLI, U of M, and many other kinds of learning and self-development. Giving back to society, you could even say it's giving back in any form. My time with my grandkids, I've got 4 grandkids, and I definitely call that giving. But the person I use for this is a hockey friend. I play hockey still. And my friend in hockey said, let me go ahead and tell you my story that relates to being a CIO of a large bank. And now I'm volunteering some, but I'm also working for a small fee, PIN money, I think we call it, helping out with a vocational counseling program part-time. So his story is in there. Healthy living, I handed this over to my wife, Bonnie. As I mentioned before, she's a retired physician, family practice physician. So if you read that article that she did for me on this website, this program I've got, she said, I can go ahead and cover health, which is mental, physical, spiritual, financial, and relationship health. The interesting thing is relationship health is probably the most highly correlated towards health, happiness, longevity, if you look at the Harvard study. But she covered it in this article. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, I think I'm going to bring her out of retirement for a brief 90-minute presentation on health when I do this in the spring, the portfolio life after age 70. There's your little sneak preview. And then finally, the enjoying personal pursuits and leisure. This used to be what most people thought about as retirement. What do you do in retirement? You sleep until noon in your jammies and put on your slippers and enjoy, just purely enjoy. And maybe it was 80% of the model for most people, personal pursuits and leisure. And what I realized after all these years of working with people and watching them and staying in touch with them after they retired, 3, 5, 10 years later, that it gets old. It gets boring for a lot of people. And it's not enough. It used to be 80% this, 20% the other 4. And now, speaking personally, I like to see my life as 20% in each of these 5 categories. Asset allocation, you learned about it in your 401k training, maybe. And this is life allocation. And so take a moment to kind of just look over these 5 elements and ask yourself, would you like this for your life? So this is the what. What are the 5 elements? And again, when you go over my guide, especially the first article, you'll go into more detail on this. But what about the how? Let's start to shift to the how do I move in that direction? Well, this is metaphorically what it looks like. You're looking over the chasm, can be a scary chasm, to get to this portfolio life. So what do you do as you see, okay, this portfolio life sounds kind of interesting. How would I get there from here? Well, I learned from Ronnie Brooks of the Shannon Institute. I took her program, the Shannon program, several years ago, and she said, what you do is you start tossing down mattresses. You drag a mattress over and toss it down. And metaphorically, that mattress would start out with, what is a portfolio life? You could read the book by David Corbett. You could read my first blog and my first article in that guide. What is it? And you look at the 5 elements. Okay, so now I've got a sense of what these 5 elements are. What's another mattress I throw? Well, the next one you throw is self-assessment. Because whatever we do, we want to take ourselves into this next phase of our life and be true to our authentic self and who we are and what our skills, our interests, our values are. So we do an audit. In a moment, I'll talk to you about how to do that audit. And then after some focus and getting ready, we craft experiments. We try things on a small scale. Maybe not buying a house in Arizona, but renting a house in Arizona. Maybe not buying an RV, but renting an RV. We do trials. That's another mattress. We shift connections. We talk to people who are doing something akin to a portfolio life or some element of a portfolio life and asking them to deconstruct it for us. How did you do that? And how could I do that? I realize networking to get a job is very much like networking to get a portfolio life. So my ninth article in the series is about networking in retirement, 10 reasons why and 10 steps to doing it. So eventually, you know, you're experimenting, you're shifting connections, and eventually things start to get more clear. Now, I have put together, this is about my seventh article, Life and Work After 60, Creating Your Future, Guided by Your Past. Now, a lot of this is to be thinking about, so what is it when I look back, could be the breadcrumbs that teach me in this broader possibility period what I could be doing. Maybe many of us, like myself, abandoned some of the things we did when we were young, and it's time to resurrect those things. But we have to first bring them back to consciousness. First, we have to bring them back to our minds. So in this particular article, what I do is I say, take a piece of paper, and I give an example. You can blow it up and print it. Let me think about the three stages of my life. The period from birth to 18 is my childhood and youth. The next column would be from age 19 to 36, my young adult period. And then a third column could be my adult period after age 37 to today. And if I look at that at three columns side by side by side, and I draw a line in the middle, what's above the line as the positive experiences, and what's below the line as neutral or negative? And to fill up these three boxes and say, all throughout my life, I've had these experiences, and I want to focus mostly on the positives. I want to focus on what gave me joy, gave me pleasure, engagement, and purpose. And what is it that looks like a common thread in all those things? What does it look like? And why is that? Well, creating our future guided by our past means life is lived forward but understood backwards. This is a Soren Kierkegaard quote that I often share with my clients. Life is lived forward but understood backwards. Benjamin Button, I think, was the movie that highlighted this. You might remember that movie. Second, you can't connect the dots looking forward. Steve Jobs. You know, we look backwards to connect dots. We can't see as clearly in the future without looking backwards first. This one I got from Kate Schaefer's. If a glimpse of the future is possible, it must come from an intimacy with the present clarified by the great works of the past. Robert Kaplan, a journalist, had that quote. And the final one that really sticks with me is, give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man. Aristotle gets credit. I think St. Francis of Assisi also gets credit for that. But original version, we think, from Aristotle. And with that one, there's a really fascinating documentary. Some of you might have seen this one. It's called 7 Up. It's up to 63 up, and it could be 70 up if this documentarian does another version of it. Using that Aristotle quote, he said, is this true? You know, give me the child till he is 7, I'll show you the man. Is it true? So what he did is he took children in England, and by the way, I think this documentary is on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but you can get it. And each of the chapters is showing these kids that were born in 1954, the same year I was born, and now they're up to 70. They're about to turn 70. And in 7 years, what did you see from these children? And what you see is the personalities of half of them are wealthy kids, half of them are poor. And you wonder what happens every 7 years. And to the right, the picture to the right is a man who you see him at age 7 on the right of this picture, and you see him at age 56. And as you watch the series, you realize there's a lot of common threads in his life. His personality, his intelligence, his choices are almost predictable. But you see that commonality of interests and activities. So the question becomes, is this true for you? Are there some threads to your life that you can trace from the 3 different chapters of your life. So I thought, okay, if I'm an instructor, I better try this out. This is not just an academic exercise. I should test it out to see if it works. So I took that same model. I drew the line. I put the words above each of the 3 times of my life. And I said, what are the common threads? What has come up consistently for me to test this theory? So the first is sports and recreation. As a kid and as a young adult, as an adult, watching, doing. I still play hockey, played last night. Biking a couple times a week. On Wednesdays with a 75-year-old buddy, and on the weekends with my friends that are 50. What did I do? I had to get an e-bike, of course, to level the playing field. I put it on economy when I'm with my 75-year-old friend, and I slow it down. But on the weekends, when I'm with my 50-year-old friends, I crank it up to touring, which is the second level up, so I can be in the lead instead of them waiting for me all the time. So we make adjustments, right, as we age. But it's sports and recreation that I've loved in all 3 of the stages. And still do it today. And I love to watch too. Art. Art would be music, photography, theater. And sometimes in these portfolio life elements, you've got a combination of an interest and a giving. So when I was invited to be on the board of the History Theater in St. Paul, I realized that can combine the interest in the arts, theater, live theater, with stewardship of the organization, a board role. So oftentimes these portfolio life elements overlap, and that's great when they can overlap, especially if it's the right people, the right activities, the right place. So I love the History Theater, and I love music as often as possible in my life, and photography. So that's the second one. And the third one is helping, teaching, and guiding individuals that I've worked with all throughout my life, being a coach as a kid, being a mentor as a young adult, and teaching and coaching is what I've always done, professionally and also as a volunteer. So these are the 3 pictures that help me remember it's been true historically and it's true today. Keep doing the sports and recreation, keep doing the arts, keep doing the helping, teaching, guiding, coaching. So that's my through line, my golden threads. And how about you? When you look back, what are your recurring themes? What are they? That's the task. That's that second big mattress. that's not an easy one. It takes many years, or many months, and it can take years. But if you go to my guide, you'll see the how-to. It's my 7th article on how to do this yourself. Do a lot of these things all by yourself. And then conversations you have with people. So with that, I want to conclude with this article that I wrote about the portfolio life transformation. It really isn't a change, it's a transformation. You're a different person at this stage. And here are the 5 words I use. And again, all these are in an article in that series from the Retirement Reimagined Guide. So the 5 words start with patience. Probably the most frequent comment I get from my clients is, thank you for telling me it might take 1 to 3 years to get settled into this portfolio life, because I work with high achiever executives, leaders, nonprofit and for-profit, and they're expecting results fairly quickly. And I tell them, slow down, be patient, because you're going to default maybe from ending something to starting something impulsively that might not be in your best interest. So be patient and understand that in time this will happen, and maybe get a goal partner or other people in a small group to help you gradually move through this. Don't rush it. Trust that the universe will conspire to give you some things, but also trust that there's this concept that Kate and I love, Kate Schaefer's and I love, called planned happenstance. You're planning to do something and then stuff just falls in your lap. Well, it could be good or it could be bad. So you have to have discernment. You have to have an understanding of what are your common threads, what are your preferred skills, interests, values, so that you can vet opportunities and trust that the universe will give you things, and especially your network of people that care about you and like you and want to give you good things, but also know that you also have to discern and say yes to some and no to others. Experiment. This is an active engagement where you want to craft experiments. By the way, there's a book called Working Identity by Hermione Ibarra. It's called Working Identity. And it changed my profession years ago in the early 2000s. And basically her model is this: craft small experiments before you make a bigger commitment. Just try things out on a small scale, number one. Number two, shift connections to people that occupy the space you're wanting to move into. Talk to people like there's so many OLLI people in this community that are moving in this direction. Talk to them. Shift connections, not to the old people that want to talk about the old days from the work situations, but people who have explored new things. Shift connections, and then see what makes sense. The third part is make sense. Great book, great model, experiment. And the curiosity is about talking to people, getting out of your office, getting off of Zoom, and well, maybe Zoom is okay, but getting out with people and having a curiosity about what are they doing. Let them guide you. Don't be isolated. And finally, generosity. And this really ties directly to purpose. Generosity meaning, what are you going to do that is a task bigger than yourself or outside of yourself? And this is where I once again offer a bit of a cautionary note, and that is from the book called Give and Take by Adam Grant. Basically says there's givers, takers, and matchers in this world. The givers are the generous ones. The takers are, it's all about me. And the matchers are saying, if I give you a $100 present, I better get a $100 present back in return. The punchline is the most successful and the least successful people are the givers. The least successful people are the martyr givers, the ones that give too much and become failed givers because they burn out or they just feel exploited. The most successful people, according to Adam Grant in his book, Give and Take, are the otherish givers. They lead with generosity, but they have a healthy selfishness, boundaries. Really important skill to learn as we have a target on our back that says, I'm retired and I'm available for whatever you need, as much as you need. We all have to have boundaries. So generosity with a caveat. Lead with generosity, have healthy self-protection. So these 5 words will help you. It's like the bumpers in bowling. I bowl with my grandchildren, and the bumpers really help you stay in the lane. These 5 words will help you. So I think that is the end of my 20 minutes of allocated time. So I am going to end this program now and turn it back to you, Kate.
George, thank you so much. And I will put those links in the chat for everyone to see, not only George's blog, but also that book he referenced, the Hermione Ibarra book. And I also do want to mention that George is going to be teaching a course for us this fall, co-teaching with several of us, including me, called Wise Gatherings, Finding and Creating Spaces for Shared Passions and Growth. And then next winter, he will be teaching a whole course on this concept of a portfolio life in your future. So let me now turn it over to Carol Veldman Rudie. Carol, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kate. And I will put up my slides so that hopefully you can see them as we go forward. There they should be. First of all, thanks to George, who perfectly described my own personal retirement. I cannot believe all the years that I've been active at the Museum of Russian Art, connecting with my earliest passion with art, and the wonderful experiences that I've had and the privileges of serving that institution, while at the same time being involved with OLLI in a series of longstanding presentations on various aspects of Russian art. So it's been my privilege to be involved, as you can tell from my presentation. This particular session, this fall session, the course that I am offering connects directly with an exhibit at the Museum of Russian Art. We are putting up a nesting doll exhibit on the main floor of the museum. And so it gives me an opportunity to do a PowerPoint presentation for OLLI on the background of the nesting doll experience in the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union, and also to offer a series of tours of the exhibit after that presentation is concluded. So if you check your OLLI catalog, you will see that you sign up for a tour and then you automatically are registered for the Zoom presentation that offers you the background for that particular class. What I'd like to do, though, is illustrate more broadly the kinds of things that you can expect from anything that I offer through OLLI, through the OLLI program. I regularly create PowerPoint presentations on Russian Empire and Soviet art, one of which, of course, I will be doing for this class, and I will illustrate very briefly in the few minutes that I have how I create a PowerPoint presentation that will give you, the participant, an opportunity to understand the topic more broadly than what you might understand it from just attending the exhibit. And then when my PowerPoint presentation coincides with an exhibit at Tamora, at the Museum of Russian Art, picture, of course, on my slide there, then I also provide tour opportunities. Very often, I discover that even OLLI people have not been to the museum. And so this offers a marvelous opportunity for you to get a guided tour of an exhibit at the museum and hopefully put it on your future museum tour list. And then finally, I also offer a workshop, a 5-part workshop entitled The Art of Seeing. This one is like the tours, not available on Zoom, of course, because it truly is a hands-on workshop, and I hope to be offering that again sometime in the curriculum this coming year. So my PowerPoint presentations also have evolved into courses. So I have a variety of 4 to 8 or 9 week courses on various topics of Russian culture and Russian art, which I also offer periodically as opportunity allows me in the OLLI program. So now to talk about the current exhibit and the PowerPoint presentation that I'll be offering on the Monday before the week of the tours. What happens in that PowerPoint presentation? Well, I have the privilege of working with art. And so, of course, PowerPoint presentations about art are also filled with gorgeous examples of that art. But my PowerPoint presentation is designed to give you background information that would not be readily available to you if you were just to saunter into the Museum of Russian Art and walk through an exhibit. And so part of my background information for this particular show, because it deals with the making of wooden nesting dolls, is to give you the background about Russian environment, particularly its northern forest. And you're looking at it here and you're thinking, that looks just like the boundary waters. And of course, you're correct. Here in Minnesota, we have a personal experience with the kind of forests that cover most of northern Russia in terms of its geography, which means that people live in wood. All of their villages and all of their houses are built of wood. Their villages are small and buried in woods. And the result is that people become incredibly good woodworkers, as I hope you can see from this particular slide of a very ordinary what we would call a log cabin home, because that's the basic construction. But take a look at the window surrounds and the pillars that technically hold up the roof. And you will see, I hope, an illustration of what I'm talking about when I say Russians in the northern world of Russia are incredibly good woodworkers. In fact, here is one of the oldest examples of a couple of bird houses that were created in the early 18th century. Wood is, of course, perishable, so there's not a lot of examples left of this kind of thing. But here are a couple of bird houses. Now, I know you're wondering where the bird goes in, and I hope that you've already spotted that in the example on the left, the bird goes in through the mouth. And in the example on the right, the bird goes in under the woman's chin. But I'm hoping that this gives you an example of what Russian carvers are producing, even to this day, where these kinds of skills continue. Spoon making in the 1900s. Here's a couple of old photographs of a village where spoons were made as a specialty and then sold as in adjoining villages as a commodity, which of course later becomes highly decorative. And we add to the capacity of this kind of woodwork the capacity to create a variety of items that are also beautiful. However, most of the tools created in this northern woods environment are made of wood. And here we have a common example. You need a comb, you make it out of wood. You need shoes, you make them out of birch or linden bark. You weave them. You need baskets for holding things. Very simple, you use the same material. And so being surrounded by wood means that the Russian peasants and villagers in the north of Russia are continuing to use and understand wood as their basic tool for life. This extends not only into building houses, but also into building churches. So here are a couple of churches. There is the summer church and the winter church. Of course, when you build churches out of wood, you can't possibly create a fire inside of them to heat the building. So summer church is large because you don't need a lot of heat. The winter church on the side is small. All of its rooms are very intimate. And both churches are filled with the most important religious object of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian people, and that is the wooden icon. Because there's so much wood and the capacity for creating in wood is so widespread, when we are creating religious artifacts like icons, a historical development from Byzantium, we don't make metal versions, we don't make mosaics, we make them out of wood. And here's a classic example of St. George and the Dragon on wood. You notice that it's bowed, and here it is, because the finished product is only on one side. Here is that same icon in the back, and you can see it's made out of various planks of wood that need to be braced against the natural inclination of wood to bend. And so the churches and people's homes and people's public spaces are all graced with appropriate placed icons made in wood. Well, if that's not enough, we also make toys out of wood. I know that might be a little difficult for us to imagine given the plethora of toys that are around. And it might also be difficult for us to realize that the main place where toys, particularly these wooden toys, were originally created is a monastery. But it's the most important monastery in Russia. And here we have an overview photograph of Most Holy Trinity Monastery in Sergev Posad, one of the most important of the monastic developments in early Russia. Here is Saint Sergei, who founded the monastery and whose idea it was to create wooden toys, wooden artifacts, wooden souvenirs for the many pilgrims and worshipers who came. And as a result, we have a huge wooden toy creation in northern Russia that I think many of us might even recognize. Certainly, if we've ever been to Russia itself, we've seen these continuing as toy options or souvenir options to this day. And you can see they're very intricate, and not only in carving, but also in mechanization. Because here we have a couple of Russian bears on a teeter-totter, a seesaw, and you can tell that it is movable. Again, here on the upper side, we have a man with goat. And again, you can see that this toy is movable. So all of this material coming out of the craftsmanship of Northern Russian, particularly men would have been the carvers in this case. Women did the textiles, men did the carving and the woodworking. So all of this experience in this Northern Woods area in carving. And my PowerPoint presentation in connection with this class will go into some detail about the richness of that experience. I'm simply giving you an overview at this point. However, at one point, industrialization takes over. People no longer are content or want to bother with wooden toys and with other building needs, and certainly with different tools. And so there is a perceptible decline in quality carving that happens toward the middle and toward the end of the 1800s. By that time, there's a group of people, mostly rich industrialists, sort of the equivalent of our Carnegies and Rockefellers. There's a group of rich industrialists who also are patrons of the art and who are interested in preserving these native crafts. So when they purchase one of their vast estates, like this particular estate here, which includes thousands of acres, forested in this case, and also the land that houses the villages, or that is the site for villages of now freed serfs, now peasants. People in these purchasing these estates take an interest in preserving the native crafts. And on these estates, people begin to deliberately design things, employ artists to draw designs for objects that would retail in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg, and give those designs to peasant carvers so that they have an excuse for creating things in a folk style. And so this construction of furniture in the folk style is ongoing in multiple ways in a variety of these large estates. It coincides with the Art Deco and Art Nouveau movement. And so people in Moscow are purchasing these large pieces of furniture in keeping with their redecoration prospects. However, it is also clear that more is needed. And when an artist returns to one of the estates, in fact, the estate that I just showed you, from Japan, he comes with something interesting in hand. A Japanese nesting doll. And he says, couldn't we make these? So he turns the concept over to a carver, to a local carver, and the resulting set he paints. And for the first time in around 1890, we have introduced the Russian nesting doll. And from here, the history is most interesting. It is a study of creativity, not only, but it is also a study of good international marketing and great educational marketing, because the first market is to the education world of toys, and the second market is to the international 1900 Paris exposition. More on that in the lecture upcoming. But you can see as well how this would fit in with the ongoing desire to both keep up the craft tradition in Russia and to provide items that really do reflect the culture of the time. Here, for example, is a photograph, a color photograph, 1902, of 3 young girls in a typical Russian village. They're in front of their house there, and you can see the style of their dress is mimicked in these styles on the nesting dolls. So that's the very first example of what nesting dolls became when they were first introduced. The main toy manufacturer of the time, the monastery at Sergei-Posad, takes initiative with this nesting doll tradition, and then begins a whole history of nesting dolls in the Russian Empire. So much so that I show you this map of all the places where nesting dolls have become a thing. So here in the insert, you can see the little rectangle from of the area from which the main production of nesting dolls comes, and pinpointed on the map are the various towns with their highly individualistic nesting doll creations as they pick up this tradition. So after this kind of background, the exhibit tour at the Museum of Russian Art, and I'll give you the address there because this is an in-person tour, obviously. So 5500 Stevens Avenue South, simply off of 35W at Diamond Lake Road exit. And you literally cannot miss the renovated building, renovation courtesy, of course, of Julie Snow. So this is the museum, a fairly current photograph. You can see our tribute and our statement about our relationship to Ukraine. At this moment, we are, of course, in support of the Ukrainians. But the exhibit will show you of the various examples of different places, different towns that took up this tradition, this new tradition, very new tradition to the Russian Empire. So you get that kind of a production, a kind of a doll in the town of Maiden. This is the way the doll will evolve and develop under the with the help of the artistic people in the space. And in Kirov, we will get yet another version of the doll. And in Koklamova, which does this beautiful painting on wood, we get yet a different version. And of course, from there, we go to an infinite variety of dolls. Everything that nests is basically open for development. We will also, in the PowerPoint presentation, cover additional things that may not be in the museum itself. For example, we'll take a look at what happens to the tradition under the Soviets. And when the Soviet Union falls, we will take a look at how artists make the nesting doll a kind of canvas for their own particular artistic expressions. And hopefully you will join me both in that background presentation and at the museum in a personal tour. It's when we do the tour that we have a wonderful opportunity to actually talk about and discuss what is happening with this tradition. So with that, I will conclude and turn it back to you, Kate. Thank you very much.
Carol, that was fascinating and beautiful and very exciting. I also want to mention, so not only is Carol doing a course for us, as she mentioned, on nesting dolls, but last summer she did a field trip course for us on Eastern Europeans in Minneapolis, culture, food, and the immigrant experience. So also really important to understand the people that are contemporary to us as well and linking that history. So thank you so much, Carol. And now we'll hear from our OLLI scholar, Ethan Besser Fredrick. Ethan?
Yes, I'll go ahead and get started sharing my screen. Hello, and let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Ethan Besser Fredrick, and I am a graduate student at the University of Minnesota and a visiting faculty member at Macalester College right now, though I sort of move around the metro area. I'm a historian that works specifically in the history of Mexico and the history of Catholicism, and I want to present to you a lecture about a historical figure that maybe some of you know about, but I'd like to complicate or add a little bit to your understanding, and that's the woman Malintzin, the woman who conquered Mexico, that I'm rather provocatively naming this lecture. This is a story of the conquest of Mexico, done by the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century. And this is a story that you probably know a little bit something about, or at least at some point have been taught. And the story goes that in 1519, Hernan Cortez and a few hundred brave conquistadors landed in Mexico, and within a few years, through the superiority of guns, germs, and steel, were able to conquer the native Aztec Empire and build a Spanish empire in the region. And over here on the right, we have a map of their arrival and march towards this, the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, arriving here in the Gulf of Mexico. And on the left, we can see a later painting depicting a large part of this history that you've probably already been taught, which shows brave Spaniards in steel armor and on horseback charging against indigenous fighters who are fighting back, but are just really unable to contest the advanced fighting methods and technology of the Spaniards. Well, I'm here to tell you that by and large, for the last 60, 70 years, professional historians have almost entirely disregarded the way this story is told and said that a lot of other factors that we rarely talk about in the past actually played the decisive role in how this region was conquered. And here I'm going to talk about one particular person that I think stands out and that I think is a real key to understanding this time and this process in human history. And that is the woman Malintzin. So when Hernan Cortez and the other Spanish conquistadors arrived in what's now Mexico, they established a port town called Veracruz, or the True Cross, very Spanish Catholic of them. But there were already people living there, a Maya trading community. And originally, the Maya trading community wasn't so happy to see these foreigners arrive, but they're a merchant town, and so they were very happy to do business with the Spanish. And the Spanish traded them some things, and in return, the Maya traded them a set of slaves they had. And one of those slaves was a woman named Malintzin. So what's so special about her? Well, she spoke both Nahuatl and Maya. So Nahuatl is the language of the Aztecs spoken through most of what is present-day Mexico. And she also spoke Maya. And there's dozens of different Maya dialects, and it's not clear which ones she spoke, but she seems to have spoken several. And then, this I think adds to the impressiveness of her resume. She is given to Cortez in March, and by all accounts, by the end of that summer, she is fluent in Spanish as well. She teaches herself. And so she is nothing short of a polyglot and probably a genius. Why does this matter? Well, the conquest of Mexico wasn't all just one big war and one big battle. There was actually a lot of diplomacy and back and forth and negotiation because a few hundred Spaniards needed quite a bit of help and assistance to conquer the region. And at every step along the way, whenever Hernan Cortez was working with an indigenous leader, Malintzin was actually the one doing the talking. And we can see here in an indigenous piece of art made shortly after the conquest, we can see Cortez talking, yes, with indigenous leaders, but right behind him, Malintzin translating, going back and forth, and giving him advice about how to talk to them along the way. She also provided a lot of counsel about which indigenous leaders to talk to and work with, how to approach them, what to say. She played such a large role in diplomacy and strategy that in a lot of indigenous sources about the conquest of Mexico, she is actually referred to as Cortez, because the indigenous leaders all assumed that somebody so central must in fact be the leader. So that's how important Malintzin was to the conquest. Well, how important was talking to indigenous people? I thought that the Spanish were there to conquer them. So let's unpack that a little bit. Without Malintzin's aid of how to actually negotiate with and talk to the various indigenous leaders, it's entirely likely the entire conquest of Mexico by the Spanish would have failed. Historians today recognize that guns and steel probably didn't matter that much in the conquest. Instead, if we were to pick two things that most historians point to as why the Spanish were able to conquer so much of the Americas, it was European diseases and indigenous allies. And we're going to talk specifically about indigenous allies, but I'll bring up diseases in a few places. For example, to illustrate the important role that indigenous allies played in helping the Spanish conquer the Aztec Empire, when Cortez finally conquered the major Aztec city of Tenochtitlan in 1521, he had just under 1,000 conquistadors. So there's less than 1,000 Europeans there. And then by contrast, he had about 100,000 indigenous allies. And the Aztecs had about a similar armed force of about 100,000 people. So in the whole entire siege, there's 200,000 fighting indigenous people and fewer than 1,000 Spaniards. And so I think that illustrates some of the importance of indigenous allies. Now, maybe you're a little bit skeptical, or maybe you say, this is so surprising. I've been told over and over again that guns and steel and this technology were so important. Well, let's just look at one piece of that technology. Over to the right here, I have an image of a Spanish arquebusier. This is the most advanced gun of the time period, and it's what the Spanish would have used and been familiar with. If you can see on this engraving, the Spaniard would have had to have balanced the gun on top of a little stand here to help him balance and aim it. The guns are quite heavy at the time. On top of that, the gun is smoothbore rather than rifled, meaning if you were to stick your finger in the barrel of the gun, it would be entirely smooth in there because they hadn't figured out the very complex process of rifling a gun. This means when you shoot a bullet, it ricochets all along the barrel, and who knows where it's going to go when it comes out. So these guns are not very accurate beyond 100 yards. You can only shoot them every 3 minutes. It takes about 3 minutes to fire them. And at their peak, the Spanish only had 21 of these guns. And I don't care how good of a shot you are. I don't care how important you think your gun is. If you only have 21 guns, you're not going to beat a 100,000 man army. So technology really didn't play that big of a role. Instead, it is the role of these indigenous allies. And Malintzin personally secured the alliances between Spaniards and various indigenous city-states and leaders to win supplies, intelligence, and manpower about how to actually conquer the region. So you might be asking yourself, why would an indigenous woman help the Spanish conquer Mexico? Wouldn't all indigenous people be opposed to this? And Malintzin, historically and culturally, is actually a really big focus point for this question. And for some Mexicans, she's actually seen as a sort of Benedict Arnold, a symbol of local collaboration and treason. And there's several ways that this culturally manifests, and one of them here is in a mural. This is in the National Palace in a 1951 mural done by the famous muralist Diego Rivera. And it shows the Spanish negotiating among themselves about how to best divide the spoils of the Americas and coins. And behind this one conquistador, you can see an indigenous woman with her face covered, and then a small blue-eyed child who also otherwise looks indigenous on her back. And this is meant to represent Malintzin and some of her children that she had with conquistadors who had a mixture of indigenous and European ancestry. But this isn't a very favorable depiction of her. She's carrying luggage and covered in tarp, just like the donkeys and oxen behind her. So in Mexico today, Malintzin is not really viewed that favorably. And in modern day Spanish, she's often called La Malinche, but it comes from that name, Malintzin. So let's try and make sense of this. Why would an indigenous woman work with the Spanish at all? Why would she play such an integral role in rallying other indigenous people to help the Spanish conquer the Aztecs? To answer this question, we have to understand a little bit about the Aztec Empire. And one of the things I argue is that, like lots of empires that have fallen, the Aztec Empire really was its own worst enemy. So what we know of as the Aztec Empire is more accurately called the Triple Alliance. Nobody at the time called themselves Aztecs. Aztec is actually a word invented by a German anthropologist in the 19th century. Nobody alive ever called themselves Aztecs. But we know it as that, so I'm going to keep using that term just not to be confusing. The Aztec Empire occupied most of what's today Mexico from about 1428 until 1521 when the Spanish conquered it. The Triple Alliance, so called because it was made up of 3 city-states, was based in the core of the Valley of Mexico. And the most important of these cities was Tenochtitlan, which is modern-day Mexico City. And surprise, surprise, it was occupied by a group of people who called themselves the Mexica, which is where the name Mexico comes from today. These Mexica, who spoke Nahuatl, like I said, conquered the surrounding area in a really fast and surprising way in the 15th century. And we can see this red empire spreading out from where Mexico City is today. Now, they did leave those Maya coastal towns alone on the Gulf of Mexico, for instance, where Cortez landed himself, because they wanted to continue the profitable trade routes with the rest of the Americas. Their empire was enormous and diverse and not really unified around anything other than having been conquered. There are dozens of linguistic groups and independent city-states that are all brought under one common empire. And so people might listen to the Aztecs, but they're not always happy with having been conquered. And that actually plays an important role literally 1 generation before the Spanish arrive. Tired of paying tribute to the Aztecs, a league of conquered cities got together and organized a rebellion and said, we're going to overthrow the Aztecs and be done with this empire. And this happens at the very end of the 15th century, but unfortunately, we're not exactly sure what year. Now, this rebellion ultimately fails. The Aztecs are very, very powerful, very good at fighting war, and they're able to suppress the rebellion. And they decided that they needed to stop rebellions like this from happening in the future. And so they decide they're going to centralize more and more power, and they're really going to crack down and punish those cities and those indigenous leaders who had rebelled against them. And it's in this context that the Spanish arrive. And so I always like to tell people the worldview that we have of the Aztecs, what we know about them, the things that are written about them, comes from such a unique and bizarre time period. Shortly after a rebellion, they're cracking down on rebels and trying to reestablish power. It's a very unique time period. So I like to tell students, imagine if the only thing historically that we knew about the United States came from right after the Civil War and came from visitors that didn't speak English and didn't like Americans very well. How might they have interpreted the Ku Klux Klan and its rise, or the occupation of the South, or the emancipation of slavery? It's a very unique time period in Aztec history, and the Spanish aren't very good sociologists when they arrive. And so as a result, our understanding of the Aztecs is a little bit warped. And that actually plays a big role in our understanding of how the Aztecs responded to this. If you know very much about the Aztecs, probably one of the things you know about them is that they sacrificed thousands and thousands of people to their bloodthirsty gods. Well, in reality, this is not quite a good understanding of the Aztecs. The demanding of sacrifices to be sacrificed in Tenochtitlan was a relatively new practice. The Aztecs imposed it as a way of punishing those cities that had rebelled. Now, up to this point, the way the Aztecs had controlled their empire was through royal marriages, and they practiced polygamy. So the king of the Aztecs would be married to many, many women, each of whom was basically a princess from different conquered cities. So that way there was always a diplomatic relationship between the center and the outside. Well, that big rebellion made the Aztecs rethink this system and said, do you know what? We don't want to do diplomatic marriages with you anymore. Instead, if you rebelled, you still have to send us some of your noble children, but it's so that we can sacrifice them. And so offering of nobles as blood sacrifices to the gods became a more and more important aspect of Aztec political rule. But hopefully, as I've demonstrated here, it was less about religion and more about political control. Now, a large number of these hostages were sacrificed in new mass rituals in Tenochtitlan, and this came from some tradition that already existed in the Americas that had some human sacrifice, but it was more common historically for there just to be limited blood offerings, where a king or a nobleman would go to the top of the pyramid and cut their ear or their lip or their nose and offer some of their noble blood to the gods in thanks for what the gods do. And I keep emphasizing the importance of noble blood because they believed that the gods wanted noble blood. They didn't want peasant blood like you or mine because you and I aren't anything special. And so what the Aztecs wrote about and what you have sort of gotten through their misconstrued history is the idea that the Aztecs sacrificed thousands of people every single year in these bloodthirsty rituals, when in reality, it was mostly about punishing these political elites. But nonetheless, you can imagine the political elites in these rebellious cities weren't very happy with this new sacrifice system. And this is where we get Malintzin's story. Malintzin was a noblewoman from one of these cities that had rebelled. And at some point, as part of this hostage sacrifice system, she was put on the open slave market. And that's how she ended up in that Maya trading village on the Gulf of Mexico, hundreds of miles from where she actually came from. Now, I want to do as an aside here, slavery existed in the Americas like lots of places in the world historically, but very, very differently from the Atlantic slave trade. So I don't want you to think that there was something like big cotton plantations with slave workers. It was nothing like that. But there is some limited slave trade, and poor Malintzin, a noble woman, found herself caught up in that slave trade. Now, unfortunately, we don't know originally where she came from or how old she was, but we do know by 1519 she was in the possession of Maya slave traders living on the Caribbean coast when Hernan Cortez was given her. Now, think about how unique and special this coincidence and interaction is. Malintzin has no love for the Aztec Empire. Her family, her city have all been sacked by them. She's been sold into slavery. She has no reason at all to be loyal or helpful to the Aztec Empire. And she finds herself both in the very poor position of being an enslaved woman, so she's sort of handed around to the conquistadors, but at the same time, she's a noble woman with all the cultural and political education that would include, which is why she can speak multiple languages, and it means she's also very daft at understanding core politics and how to move around diplomatically. Now, like all Spanish allies, and that's how the Spanish referred to indigenous people that helped them, she was required to convert to Catholicism as part of being bought by the Spanish. And like almost all converts at the time, she adopted a Christian name, and she adopted the name Maria after the Virgin Mary. Now, Nahuatl speakers, those indigenous speakers of the Valley of Mexico, struggled to pronounce the name Maria, and they rounded it to the best way they could figure out how to pronounce it, which is Malintzin. Now, the Spaniards heard indigenous people calling her Malintzin, and they figured that must be her original name before she took the name Maria. And so the Spaniards also started calling her Malintzin, but they can't pronounce Malintzin because that's not a very natural word in Spanish. And so they start calling her Malinche. And that's how she's most popularly known in the Spanish world today. We have no idea what her original name was, where she originally came from, what noble family she belonged to. A lot of her life is a mystery because of how bad the Spanish conquistadors were at understanding anything about her, or probably even asking. And so she has her own story, her own backgrounds, her own motive. So in no way, I think, is she a traitor to the people of Mexico. Because if anything, she's defending her own people against the conquering Aztecs by giving the Spanish everything they need to overthrow that empire. And it's just too bad, an unfortunate consequence of history that we don't know more about her personally. And so in sum, if we think about Malintzin's life, and we think about the role that she played in the Spanish conquest, there's a couple of lessons that we can take away about how the Spanish conquered the Americas, or how this conquest worked. And the first thing that I want to emphasize is that guns and steel and pluck and bravery have some kind of role, but really luck is what the Spanish should be saying thanks to. They attributed a lot of it to God, but I think as historians, we can say that luck played an enormous role. So let's think about all the ways that Cortez was lucky. First, the place that he landed in Mexico wasn't loyal to the Aztecs. It was its own independent merchant state, very happy to trade with anyone who showed up on the doors. If Cortez had landed in a more loyal or militaristic place, maybe he wouldn't have even made it off the coast. Second, not only did he get gifted slaves from the merchant community that he landed in, but he was gifted a slave who was a perfect key to understand and unravel the Aztec Empire. A skilled noblewoman with all sorts of linguistic and diplomatic skills and a deep grudge against the Aztecs. You really couldn't imagine a more perfect ally and auxiliary to help the conquistadors conquer the region. Next, Malintzin was incredibly talented, motivated, and probably a genius. I don't know very many people that can learn 5 or more languages, let alone learn them over the course of a few months, and then translate that into high-level diplomatic negotiation. I've been working in Spanish for years, and I hope nobody ever asks me to do intense, very delicate political negotiations in Spanish, because that is just a different linguistic level of challenge and importance. And then on top of that, Malintzin wasn't only a genius, wasn't only competent, wasn't only motivated, but she also knew exactly which cities in the empire had recently rebelled, which cities very much didn't like the Aztecs, how to negotiate with them, and what the cultural norms were. So that way the Spanish didn't come across as oafish boobs wherever they went. Now, all of this might lead you to say, well, then why did the Spanish end up in charge? If the indigenous people are so clever and if they outnumber the Spanish so much and if guns aren't that important, how did the Spanish end up ruling the area for centuries? And that has to do with a final factor that nobody at the time understood, and that's the role of disease. The Spanish brought with them many European old world diseases that the people of the Americas had absolutely no immune system against. And you and I have enough experience with COVID now to know the horrible role that mass disease and that kind of plague devastation can play in a society. And in some ways, we still don't really know. I think the last time I checked, the CDC estimated that the mortality rate of contracting COVID is around 1 or 2%. So 1 or 2% of all people that contract it ended up perishing at the height of the pandemic. By contrast, the mortality rate of the diseases the Europeans brought over was somewhere between 90 and 95%, meaning 90 to 95% of all people who got sick perished. And as we also learned in our own experience of COVID, this hit the cities the hardest because it's where people are densely congregated. And so not only are Aztec armies defeated by disease as soldiers congregate together, but their major cities are destroyed by disease as well, which is where the nobles lived. It's where the richest people live. It's where the generals live and the priests live and the literate people live. And so I like to tell people, imagine if the United States was wiped out and the only part of our society and culture that remained was in Appalachia. That's essentially what culturally, politically, and economically happened to the Aztecs because of these diseases. And that's not something the Spanish understood. That's not something they were in control of. It's not something they used. It just happened. And so in a lot of ways, the Spanish weren't really in charge of their own victory. And so let me conclude by saying, well, what lessons should we take from this story and from the important role that Malintzin played and the disease played in it? Well, we can explain all of these lucky coincidences of finding Malintzin that I talked about on the last slide by saying the Aztecs really made their own enemies. They kept open all those trade cities to do business with anyone, even their enemies. They created an entire generation of enemies and discontented subject peoples through their conquests and their sacrifices. The next thing I want to say is that Malintzin was not a traitor in any meaningful sense. She was trying to defend and avenge her own people and liberate them from the Aztecs. And for her, the Spanish were just another in a set of warlords who were fighting over the area. The conquistadors, for their part, were utterly dependent on their indigenous allies and people like Malintzin. And they only eventually emerged in control of their indigenous allies because of the devastating role that plagues played, that they, as Spaniards themselves, had immunities to. And so what I hope I'm leaving you with overall, and what I hope you expect from history lectures and OLLI generally, is that history is always full of lots and lots of diverse actors with different points of view, working at cross purposes, trying their best to accomplish their own goals, even if they don't fully have all the information at the time. Thank you all, and I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about Malintzin and the conquest of Mexico.
And Ethan, thank you so much for a fascinating lecture today. You really helped us understand the complexities behind history that we may have learned about, but you also are a great example of a graduate student who is bringing cutting-edge scholarship to our community. And we just love those opportunities to hear what you're studying and how we can understand the world a little differently. So I just have some closing comments. I'd like to say a thank you to everyone who participated today. Nancy, Laura, George, Carol, and Ethan, thank you so much for your presentations. I'd also like to thank Grayson, who has been working behind the scenes to help us with this session and make sure that everything went smoothly. And also, let me reiterate some key information about OLLI. As we've mentioned before, our annual membership rate is $325. And for that rate, it's an all-inclusive membership. You can enroll in as many courses as you want. I should say you can request as many courses as you want. You can participate in special interest groups and book clubs and events. We have a process where sometimes we have more interesting courses than there is open seats. And, Carol's course this summer had 15 seats because it was a tour and we were using a bus. So sometimes you're not going to get into everything, but our members get into 91% of what they request. So the rate is really high. So don't be discouraged by that. And then also we do have scholarships. So please do apply for a scholarship if you need it. And we have our special running right now. You can join for the fall. It's just a fall membership opportunity. So you would be a member for just fall term for only $79. It's a great chance for you to get to know what we're all about. And let me just briefly say, you can visit our website for a lot more of this information. That's OLLI, OLLI www.umn.edu. And just a few important dates. Our course request period is open right now. It opened on August 12th and runs through the 26th. During this window, you can request as many courses as you want, and then we run the process where we have more demand than seats and maximize everyone getting, especially their first choice course. And then the fall term is October 7th through November 22nd. So don't miss out. We hope you join us. And this concludes our program for today. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you.